Writing complete sentences. This brief chapter is important for two reasons. First, and most obviously, this chapter helps you avoid three major types of errors: fragments, fused sentences, and comma splices. Second, this chapter, especially the section on fragments, introduces you to some basic concepts that you should understand in order to avoid other types of problems and errors. In particular, recognizing a complete sentence is a necessary skill for avoiding a range of punctuation and sentence structure problems. These three sections have one major concept in common. All three deal with the notion of a complete sentence. The fragments section applies to any sort of sentence, while fused sentences and comma splices focus on a common structure known as a compound sentence. In essence, a compound sentence results when two or more sentences are combined into one. 1. Fragments. A fragment is a group of words that cannot stand alone as a grammatically complete sentence. Even though fragments are common in speech and in formal writing, they are considered one of the most serious types of errors in formal writing. In this section, we provide a formal definition of fragment and discuss some of the problems with the definition, as most people seem to understand or remember it. This section also provides a useful tip for detecting fragments: the I realize tip. 2. Fused sentences. A fused sentence is a serious error that occurs when writers incorrectly attempt to combine two sentences. More specifically, the sentence has nothing at all separating these two groups of words, as in this example. A fire alarm sounded, everyone ran out of the building. We describe how you can avoid this error by first understanding that such a sentence is a compound sentence, a sentence made up of what could possibly be two sentences. 3. Comma splices. Like a fused sentence, a comma splice results when a writer does not correctly join two separate sentences. A comma splice is also considered a serious error in formal writing, but unlike a fused sentence, at least the writer has used something to separate the two parts. However, you cannot just use a comma to separate them. Following is an example of a comma splice. A fire alarm sounded, everyone ran out of the building. This section describes how you can easily correct a comma splice by putting a coordinating conjunction immediately after the comma. The most common coordinating conjunctions are and, but, and or. Fragments. Most people have at least some idea of what a sentence fragment is, or have had a teacher write frag in red ink on their otherwise pristine papers. A fragment is a group of words that cannot stand alone as a grammatically complete sentence. Fragment. Because I said you can't leave the house. Complete sentence. You cannot go to the mall because I said you can't leave the house. Grammar tip. I realize. Most complete sentences can be preceded with I realize and still sound fine. Fragments, however, will sound strange. A more technical and accurate description of how to recognize a complete sentence is given in the following, but this I realize tip is a non-technical means of recognizing most complete sentences and fragments. The tip draws on your intuitions of what seems to be a complete sentence in English, so it does not work well if your first language is not English. Complete sentence sounds okay. Complete sentence. Brian forgot his keys becomes I realize Brian forgot his keys. Sounds okay. Complete sentence. We did not win the lottery becomes I realize we did not win the lottery. Sounds okay. Complete sentence. It rained heavily becomes I realize it rained heavily. Sounds okay. Fragment. Whatever becomes I realize whatever. Sounds strange. Rolling down the hill becomes I realize rolling down the hill. Sounds strange. Since the beginning of time becomes I realize since the beginning of time. Sounds strange. What's the problem? Several studies have shown that fragments are among the most annoying, if not the most annoying, types of errors that can be committed in formal writing. Even though fragments are common in speech and can be effective used at the right time and place in written communication, many people do not believe a fragment is a complete thought. Indeed, many fragments lack a subject and a verb. Without a subject and a verb, a sentence is unlikely to communicate a complete idea. In fact, fragments are so annoying to readers that you have to wonder how they could appear in the first place. Shouldn't these errors be so obvious that we recognize and delete them? Obviously, the answer is no. Bothersome fragments still manage to creep into most people's writings sooner or later, perhaps because some fragments seem like complete thoughts, while some people's complete sentences do not seem to reflect much thought at all. Avoiding the problem. Looking for subjects and verbs. Keep both of these ideas in mind to avoid fragments. 1. Every complete sentence must have a subject and a verb. 2. Some fragments do have a subject and a verb, but they are still fragments because they start with a flag word that indicates what word comes after is not a separate sentence. Requirement number 1. A subject and its verb. A complete sentence needs a subject and a verb that goes back to this subject. The subject is a person, place, or thing. It will be made up of a noun or a pronoun. The verb is something that the subject is doing, or the verb is a verb, such as is, that is not an action but is still linked to the subject to form a complete sentence. Complete sentences. Main subjects underlined once, their verbs underlined twice. The busy executive ate lunch in her office. She wrote this story in college. Neil Armstrong received an annual salary of about $30,000 when he first walked on the moon. Billy the Kid was 21 when he was killed. Fragments. Eating lunch in her office. Who was eating? A story from college. What happened? An annual salary of about $30,000. What happened? Killed when he was 21. Who killed whom? Requirement number 2. No improper use of a flag word. Some words, usually called subordinating conjunctions, indicate that a dependent subordinate clause rather than a complete sentence is about to appear. That is, these flag words let us know that the next group of words the reader will see cannot stand as a complete sentence, even if they contain a subject and a verb. Notice how the following examples, dependent clauses, cannot stand by themselves as complete sentences despite having subjects and verbs. Fragments. Flag word, subject plus verb. When the next train arrives. Because her boss was evil. Whenever you leave. Because the photocopier is being misused. Grammar tip. Checking because sentences. One common type of fragment begins with because. Double check sentences that begin with because to make sure they are complete. You can start a sentence with because if there's an independent clause later in the sentence, as in these complete sentences. Because her boss was evil, Margaret found a job elsewhere. Because the photocopier is being misused, our manager is unhappy with us. In the next example, however, there is no independent clause coming after the because clause. Thus, this example is a fragment. Because I said that it is time to go. Avoiding the problem, moving the fragment. Almost every fragment is supposed to be part of the sentence right before it. To fix most fragments, move the fragment so it is part of the preceding sentence. If you detect a fragment, see if you can correct the error by combining it with the previous sentence. Sentence plus fragment. Correction. I will leave when the next train arrives. Becomes, I will leave when the next train arrives. Correction. Sentence plus fragment. She decided to quit because her boss was evil. Becomes, she decided to quit because her boss was evil. Correction. Sentence plus fragment. You should lock the door whenever you leave. Becomes, you should lock the door whenever you leave. Correction. Sentence plus fragment. We saw Dr. West, who lives next door. Becomes, we saw Dr. West, who lives next door. Correction. Punctuating the correction. As you can see in the last corrected example, sometimes you need a comma to separate what used to be a fragment. Depending on your own writing style, you might discover that most of your corrections would require such a comma. The best advice we can give is not to put a comma before the former fragment, unless you know why you should. See commas with adjective clauses in Chapter 11 to understand why the example just cited needs a comma. If in doubt, do not use the comma, or rewrite the correction entirely so you can keep the same ideas but put them into a sentence you know for certain how to punctuate. Grammar trivia. When a fragment isn't a frag. Sentence fragments can be effective if used judiciously, and not just in literary or narrative writing. A study published in 2006 examined 50 essays that appeared in the respected collection Best American Essays. The study found 505 fragments, creating an average of 0.93 fragments per page. Summary. A complete sentence must have a subject that has a verb. Certain types of flag words introduce a subject and a verb, but these words are dependent clauses, not complete sentences. Most fragments result from a punctuation problem. That is, the fragment should not be set off as a complete sentence. The period right before the fragment should either be deleted or replaced by a comma so that the fragment becomes one with the preceding sentence. Fused sentences. A fused sentence is a sentence that has nothing at all separating one independent clause from another. An independent clause is a group of words able to stand alone as a complete sentence. Following is an example of a fused sentence. A parade is being held. It should be enjoyable. At first glance, you might think the sentence is chaotic. Here it is again with each independent clause underlined, revealing that the problem is indeed the result of putting two such clauses together with nothing to separate them. Independent clause plus independent clause. A parade is being held. It should be enjoyable. What's the problem? The term fused sentence is used to describe this error because two clauses are fused into one. Not a bad idea, except the readers need to know where one clause stops and the other begins. A fused sentence is a compound sentence that has gone wrong. That is, the writer understandably wants to combine two sentences but fails to provide proper punctuation between the two former sentences. See Chapter 3 for more on compound sentences. Following are two more fused sentences. The second is particularly annoying because it is hard to tell if the word today describes the first or second part of the sentence. Walt Disney created the character Mickey Mouse Disney, also provided the cartoon character's voice in the earlier days. We need to talk today. I am lonely. Period test. If you could place a period in a sentence and create two complete sentences, then you must use something to separate the two parts of the original sentence. Notice how a period can be placed in roughly the middle of each of the fused sentences already given. Fused sentence. A parade is being held. It should be enjoyable. Two sentences. A parade is being held. It should be enjoyable. Fused sentence. Walt Disney created the character Mickey Mouse Disney, also provided the cartoon's character's voice in the early days. Two sentences. Walt Disney created the character Mickey Mouse. Disney also provided the cartoon character's voice in the early days. Fused sentence. We need to talk today. I am lonely. Two sentences. We need to talk today. I am lonely. We need to talk. Today, I am lonely. As you can see, each of these fused sentences consists of two sentences. A fused sentence is a serious problem, so we want to stress that you must use something to separate what could be two or more separate sentences. Correcting a fused sentence. Once you detect a fused sentence, you can correct it in numerous ways. Here are three common methods. 1. Separate the fused sentence into two sentences. Avoid relying on just this one method to fix or avoid errors such as fused sentences. The result could be a series of short, choppy, dull sentences. Fused sentence. Correction. I was sleepy, I had to stay awake becomes I was sleepy, I had to stay awake. Correction. 2. Use a comma plus and, but, or another coordinating conjunction. This is the most common means of correcting a fused sentence. See Chapter 1 for more information on coordinating conjunctions. Fused sentence. Correction. Fused sentence. I was sleepy, I had to stay awake becomes I was sleepy, but I had to stay awake. Correction. 3. Use a semicolon. This approach works when you do not want a word coming between the two parts of the sentence. See Chapter 13 for more on semicolons. Fused sentence. Correction. Fused sentence. I was sleepy, I had to stay awake. Becomes, I was sleepy, I had to stay awake. Correction. Summary. A fused sentence is a serious error. It results when there is nothing in a sentence to separate two independent clauses. To confirm a sentence is fused, see if you could put a period in the sentence to create two complete sentences. If so, and if there is nothing in the original sentence separating these two parts, then there is a fused sentence. To correct a fused sentence, you can 1. Break the fused sentence into two sentences, 2. Separate the two parts with a comma plus a coordinating conjunction, or 3. Separate the two parts with a semicolon. Comma splices. A comma splice is a sentence in which only a comma is used to separate what could be two separate sentences. In other words, a comma is incorrectly used by itself to separate independent clauses in a compound sentence, as seen as in this example. Snow White arrived late. She has a bad habit of being tardy. A comma can be used to help create a compound sentence, but the sentence would need more than just a comma to be correct. What's the problem? A comma splice is not much better than a fused sentence, which is a compound sentence having absolutely nothing, not even comma, separating independent clauses. True, at least a comma splice has something separating the two clauses, but commas have so many functions in English that a comma alone does not let readers understand the structure of a compound sentence. Other cues are needed so that readers can better interpret the compound sentence. Avoiding the problem. If you can place a period in a sentence and create two complete sentences, then you cannot use just a comma to separate the two parts. Either add a coordinating conjunction or change the comma to a semicolon. First, notice how the following comma splices could be divided into two sentences, confirming that each of the original sentences is indeed a compound sentence. Comma splice equals two sentences. Comma splice. Fish travel in schools, whales travel in pods equals fish travel in schools, whales travel in pods. Two sentences. Comma splice. Your report is late, we were depending on you equals your report is late, we were depending on you. Two sentences. Comma splice. Tennessee Williams is the name of a famous playwright. He was born in Mississippi equals Tennessee Williams is the name of a famous playwright. He was born in Mississippi. Two sentences. These examples are relatively simple. A comma splice can be confusing when there are other commas in the sentence. Following is such an example. The circled comma creating the comma splice is incorrect, but the other commas are correctly used. When I was 14, my father gave me a large, strange painting. It attempted to capture the likeness of Colonel William Travis, an ancestor who died at the Alamo. 2. Following the comma with and, but, or another coordinating conjunction. This is the most common means of correcting a comma splice. See Chapter 1 for more information on coordinating conjunctions. Fish travel in schools, whales travel in pods. Fish travels in schools, but whales travel in pods. 3. Replace the comma with a semicolon. This approach works best when you do not believe the sentence sounds right with a coordinating conjunction. A semicolon does not need a coordinating conjunction to separate two independent clauses. See Chapter 13 for more on semicolons. Your report is late. We were depending on you. Your report is late. We were depending on you. Summary. A comma splice is an error. It results when only a comma is used to separate two independent clauses. To confirm there is a comma splice, see if you can replace the comma with a period to create two complete sentences. If so, the original sentence is indeed a comma splice and should be corrected. To correct a comma splice, you can 1. Break the sentence into two sentences, 2. Separate the two parts with a comma plus a coordinating conjunction, or 3. Separate the two parts with a semicolon.